Right now, somewhere in your home, there's a piece of China. Your phone, your laptop, the battery in your car, maybe the solar panel on your neighbor's roof. But here's what most people get completely wrong. China didn't get here by being cheap. China got here by being patient and by running a plan most of the world didn't notice until it was already finished. By the end of this video, you're going to understand 3 things that most people never connect. Why 1978 was the most important economic decision of the 20th century. How China quietly became the backbone of every supply chain on Earth, and why the US-China trade conflict is harder to win than most Americans think, and what that actually means for your future. This information is more relevant right now than it's ever been, and the version you've probably heard before, it's missing the most important parts. There's one specific decision made in a single meeting in Beijing that set all of this in motion. Without it, the modern iPhone supply chain doesn't exist. Amazon's 2-day delivery doesn't exist. Half of the green energy transition doesn't exist. That decision happened in December 1978, and it didn't look like a revolution at the time. That's exactly why it worked. But the bigger question isn't just how China did this. The bigger question is, what happens now that the model is showing cracks? And why does the answer affect every working American, Canadian, and British household directly? Let's actually break this down. The starting point, 1978, and the decision nobody saw coming. In 1949, China was one of the most isolated economies on Earth. Poor, deliberately closed, and built around a single idea, self-sufficiency, no foreign investment, no exports designed for Western markets, no integration with global capital. By the late 1970s, that model had collapsed. The economy was stagnant. Hundreds of millions of people were in deep poverty. And the new leadership under Deng Xiaoping faced a choice that no communist government had ever successfully navigated. Keep the ideology or feed the people. Deng chose the people. But here's what made his approach different from every other reform in modern history. He didn't tear the system down. He opened a door inside it. In December 1978, the third plenary session of the 11th Central Committee approved what became known as reform and opening up. The World Bank has documented how this single policy shift triggered one of the longest sustained growth periods ever recorded. China averaged close to 10% GDP growth per year for nearly 3 decades straight. That's not a coincidence. That's an outcome. But the real genius of the move? Deng never called it capitalism. He called it socialism with Chinese characteristics. The label stayed the same. The economy underneath it changed completely. That's the first entry in China's playbook. Never change the label. Change the content. And what came next wasn't accidental. It was engineered, step by step. The money machine, how China turned production into permanent power. Here's where the standard story falls apart. The version most people have heard goes like this. China won the manufacturing race because labor was cheap. That's partially true. But here's the problem. Bangladesh had cheap labor. Vietnam had cheap labor. Mexico had cheap labor, right on America's border. So why did China win at a scale none of them could match? 3 mechanisms. And they worked together in a way no other country replicated. First, infrastructure at a scale the world had never seen, coordinated directly with industrial strategy. The OECD has noted that what made China's build-out unusual wasn't just the size, it was the alignment. Roads, ports, power grids, and rail networks weren't built for general use. They were built to make manufacturing faster, cheaper, and more connected than anywhere else on Earth. Second, state direction without state inefficiency in the export sector. China didn't run its factories like Soviet collective farms. It let private and semi-private companies compete brutally. But it controlled the environment around them. Land, energy, finance, export access. The state designed the playing field. Then companies fought on it. Third, and this is the part almost nobody talks about, China used foreign companies to teach itself. Every multinational that set up a factory in Shenzhen or Guangdong in the 1980s and 90s wasn't just making products. It was running a live training program for Chinese engineers, managers, and logistics operators. Quality control. supply chain coordination, production efficiency, not from textbooks, from the factory floor. Over 2 decades, China absorbed this knowledge, systematized it, and scaled it to a size the original teachers couldn't match. By 2000, China wasn't just cheap. It was becoming the most efficient manufacturing system ever built. And it was about to get a key that would open every global market at once. The ticket, WTO 2001, and the acceleration nobody could stop. The 11th of December 2001, China officially joins the World Trade Organization. This date matters more than almost any other in 21st century economic history, and it's barely taught in schools. Before WTO membership, Chinese exports faced inconsistent tariff barriers, depending on political relationships with each country. After membership, China got the same guaranteed low tariff rates as every other member. By international law, locked in, the effect hit immediately. Between 2001 and 2008, China's share of global exports nearly doubled. By 2010, China had become the world's largest exporter, surpassing Germany, which had held that position for years. But here's what's almost never said about this moment. China didn't join the WTO as a finished product. It joined as a work in progress and used the rules of global free trade to accelerate its own industrial development in a way those rules were never designed to handle. Think about what actually happened in American towns. A manufacturer in Ohio needs electronic components. China offers them at a price no domestic supplier can match. The company buys from China. The domestic supplier loses the contract, shrinks, closes. The workforce relocates or retires. The institutional knowledge disappears. The entire supply chain migrates. And this sequence repeated itself in electronics, then solar panels, then batteries, then pharmaceutical ingredients, then rare earth processing. The OECD's research on global value chains shows that China didn't just enter these chains at the low end. It moved up systematically, from assembly to components, from components to design, from design to controlling the critical bottlenecks of entire industries. And that's where the story stops being just about economics. The silent strategy, Belt and Road, supply chains, and the game behind the game. In 2013, Xi Jinping announced the Belt and Road Initiative. Western media called it an infrastructure plan. Some called it debt trap diplomacy. Both descriptions are partially right. Neither captures what it actually is strategically. Here's the real frame. By 2013, China had already won the production battle. It made more manufactured goods than any country in history. But production without distribution is a factory with no roads leading out. China needed to control the routes, the ports, the rail corridors, the shipping choke points, or remain dependent on infrastructure it didn't own and couldn't guarantee. China's own State Council white paper on Belt and Road, published in October 2023, describes it as a framework for connectivity and cooperation. In practical terms, Chinese investment in ports across Southeast Asia, Africa, and Europe, rail corridors through Central Asia, energy infrastructure across dozens of developing economies. By 2024, over 150 countries had signed Belt and Road agreements with China. The deeper play wasn't just logistics, it was dependency. When a country has Chinese-built ports, Chinese-financed roads, and Chinese companies running its telecommunications infrastructure, that country's behavior in international forums starts to shift. Not because anyone made a threat, but because the cost of disagreement suddenly has a very concrete price tag. China doesn't need to control governments. It needs to make itself too expensive to replace. And here's where this hits home directly. Right now, over 80% of the world's solar panel production capacity sits in China. More than 70% of global lithium-ion battery manufacturing, a dominant share of the rare earth processing that goes into every electric vehicle, every wind turbine, and several categories of advanced military hardware. These aren't coincidences. They're the outcome of China's Made in China 2025 plan announced in 2015, targeting 10 strategic industries, from aerospace to advanced robotics to next-generation IT, with explicit global market share goals, not just domestic ones. When Western governments finally mobilized a response, China had a decade head start. that gap doesn't close quickly. Where China is right now and why this isn't a finished story. Here's the part that almost all China coverage completely misses. China's model worked. It worked at a scale no country in history had ever matched. But it was built on a foundation that is now under serious structural stress from both the outside and the inside simultaneously. From the outside, the US, EU, Japan, South Korea, and Australia are all actively spending to reduce dependency on Chinese supply chains. The CHIPS Act. European battery sovereignty programs. Supply chain friendshoring. These aren't just political statements. Hundreds of billions of dollars are being redirected. But here's why this is harder than it sounds. You can't build a semiconductor fabrication plant in Arizona and declare supply chain independence. One modern chip fab takes 5 to 10 years to reach full production. Training a qualified workforce takes longer than that. And the upstream suppliers, the chemicals, the precision equipment, the subcomponents are still overwhelmingly concentrated in East Asia. China knows the transition will be slow. It's counting on that. From the inside, both the IMF's 2025 assessments and the World Bank's December 2025 China Economic Update flag the same core problem. China's growth engine ran on exports and investment. Domestic consumption, what Chinese households actually spend, remains structurally weak relative to the economy's size. The property sector crisis made this visible. Major developers like Evergrande collapsed under debt, and what was exposed underneath was critical. Chinese households had stored most of their wealth in real estate. When property prices stopped rising, consumer confidence dropped sharply. And an export-driven economy without strong domestic demand faces a brutal structural choice. Option 1, keep subsidizing exports to maintain global market share. This deepens trade friction with the US and Europe, accelerates decoupling, and invites more tariffs. Option 2, shift toward domestic consumption. This requires redistributing wealth, expanding social safety nets, and reducing state control over capital allocation, all of which are politically difficult inside the current system. Neither path is clean. Both carry serious risk. And here's the deeper implication for you. If China doubles down on exports, US-China trade conflict intensifies, which means more supply chain disruption, more inflation pressure on everyday goods, and more geopolitical instability around Taiwan and the South China Sea. If China pivots successfully to domestic demand, it becomes a more self-contained, less export-dependent economy, which actually reduces some of that friction, but creates a different kind of competition in global technology markets. Either way, the next decade of China's path runs directly through the daily economic life of anyone living in the West. What you actually know now that most people don't. Let's pull the full picture together. China's rise wasn't a miracle. It was a sequence with a clear internal logic. Open the system without destroying the state. Use low cost to enter global supply chains. Absorb knowledge from foreign manufacturers and scale it. Use WTO access to reach every market simultaneously. Move up the value chain. Control critical production bottlenecks, and build infrastructure dependency in over 150 countries. Then announce a plan Made in China 2025 to own the next generation of strategic industries before Western governments finish their next election cycle. Every step built on the last. Every step was deliberate. The phrase cheap Chinese labor captures maybe 15% of the actual mechanism. The real story is about sequencing, patience, and a state running a multi-decade strategy while democratic governments were thinking in 4-year windows. But here's the insight that should change how you read every China headline from now on. China's power is real. Its constraint is equally real. The same export dominance that made it powerful made it dependent on Western markets staying open. The moment those markets close through tariffs, reshoring incentives, or technology restrictions, China faces a structural problem it can't export its way out of. That's the tension at the center of everything you're watching in global trade right now. It's not just competition between two countries. It's two economic models, one built on consumption, one built on production, discovering that they need each other and fear each other simultaneously. And neither can fully walk away. The World Bank put it clearly in its documentation of China's development. China lifted more people out of poverty faster than any country in recorded history. What comes next depends on whether it can do something equally difficult, build a system that runs on its own people's spending, not just the world's. China spent decades buying time with its strategy. Now time is asking for something back. If this gave you a clearer, more grounded way to think about China, global trade, or how the world's big economic systems actually function hit like, it genuinely helps this channel reach people who want more than surface level headlines. Subscribe if you want more videos like this, where we skip the noise and break down how the real systems actually work. And drop a comment. Do you think China successfully transitions to a consumption-driven economy, or does the pressure build until something breaks? I read every single one.